satisfy different needs or different, again, philosophies or company strategies. Well, we don't have that because the reason is, as I said, there's so many models you can apply with an API. So first of all, you can have so many different APIs for your business model that each one of them has a different way of calculating their return on investment. One can be branding or brand equity. The other one might be time saving. The other one might be infrastructure savings. The other one might be distribution savings, or just simply direct revenue generation. So you've got so many models that, unfortunately, there is not a clear chart says if you've got an API, your return on investment is going to be so much. I wish there was, but it doesn't exist, as far as I know.
Thank you. Yes, just Andy take some fuel and yeah, so the audience is for you. Thank you to receive Andy Ture from Intel. Thank you.
Hello again. Great presentation. So I don't know how I'm going to follow that. I'll try my level best. So you already know who I am, and I'm going to skip this one as well, because I already told you guys who we are and what we do, unless some of you who are not present. All of you know this, right? Okay, so I was asked to present something on the business value of APIs, right? Not on the, initially when I saw that it was API management, so I was going to talk about our platform. But then later on it was clarified to me, saying that no, we want you to talk about the business value of APIs and your API management platform. So I got to change everything on the fly, and so this is a new slide deck. So one of the common things I heard, by the way, I did a webinar with Mastery, well, with Intel basically now, on the business value of APIs about 2 weeks ago. So if you don't find the link, email me or tweet me. I'll give you that link. But if you Google it, you should be able to find it. It's available for a replay from Bright Talk. And it talks about some of these things, what we're going to talk about, but it goes in a little bit more detail. We also have a customer use case study on that. So most commonly, customers are faced with these issues. They know they want to create API, right? They know they have certain assets that they want to expose to their customers, to their partners, and to their partners, to their consumers. But the problem is, they don't exactly understand which data or which assets to expose. Again, one of the other common theme I'm seeing is that a lot of people are talking about, how do I expose my data? It's not about exposing the data. It's about exposing your assets. There's a major difference between that. Your data is data, but your assets consist of a lot more than data. Your digital content and other valuable assets. Sometimes even your processes. Doesn't matter what it is. It's an asset for you, and then you need to promote that to someone else who can use it. But then when you start using it, you got to understand what is my potential to begin with, and how do I really properly unlock that? But then more importantly, what value is it to the people who are giving it to, right? It's not about what you think the value is from your side, but it's more about the value that creates to the end consumer. Because if you know that first, then you'd be able to properly monetize that. That's the key there, right? You have to know what it's worth for the people who are going to use it. If it is not going to be worth anything to them, then it's basically junk. You can't charge for junk unless it's a yard sale. Do you know what a yard sale is? A yard sale is where we put generally junk outside on a warm day. It gives you an opportunity. This is all US terms. You sit outside your garage, get as much sun as you can, and try to sell your junk to other people. So this can be more of a yard sale. you need to create some value to your consumers or your consumers' consumers. So, and the other point there is that one, you got to be careful about what's happening in the market as well, right? If you are trying to do something, you can become either a follower of what your competitors are doing. You also have to know what your competitors are doing, so you have to do at least that to match it. But also, more importantly, you have to be an innovative leader. Think about what your competitors are not doing, so you can do to create a lot of other people to come to you, as opposed to going to your competitors, right? And those are the other questions that most commonly people see, right? Do I attract new partners? So one of the things I keep preaching to people, that it's not about, in the old days, when you sell software to people, right? So it's about, I'll help you reduce the cost. I'll help you improve the performance. Something like that, you sell it to the IT folks. When you sell the API, if you sell it in the same model, you won't succeed, because you will not be able to show them the value of how you will reduce the existing platform's cost or improve the performance. So it's more about what you can do to create additional channel of revenue, creating additional channels, creating additional revenues. That's important, right? So when you're preaching it to somebody, you need to understand what that means so you can properly pitch to them. So obviously, when you're building an API, first you need to strategize. I see that missing with a lot of our customers, whether it's enterprise or open APIs. They always go and say, oh, that's a cool idea, let's go build something. Let's build it, they will come. Sure, they might, and if you're a small startup company, if you're running on a shoestring budget, if you don't need enough money, if you build a couple of APIs, you can wait for folks to come, you can make money. But if you're a huge enterprise organization, a big software company, when you throw people at things, 10, 20, 30 people, later on I have a slide talking about you need to build your strategy or platform like a product. So if you build that many resources, if you throw that many resources, if you're building a brand, if you're spending that kind of money, you need to figure out what you're trying to do. So you need to strategize first, properly. After you strategized, obviously, you got to have somebody come in and tell you what you're going to build and how much that's going to be worth to your customers. After you strategize it, you have to build it. So you build a platform so you can turn that assets into valuables. And then one of the things that nobody talks about is how to harden that properly, how to secure it, right? It's not just about monetizing. It's your assets. It's your gold mine. I recently wrote a blog on programmable web on that. It's your gold mine. You're exposing your gold mine. And when you're exposing it so openly, the hackers are waiting for that. So once you open it up, throw it out, they can come and clean your gold mine out. You don't want to be in that situation. So you got to harden that, and then you have to advertise. You have to go out and tell people that this is what I built. And hackathons is one way of doing it. Having a engaged developer community is another way of doing it, right? So essentially, those are things you need to do to have a successful API program. And your IT, any company's IT for that matter, will get involved and engage with you to become an enabler. And these are the ways to do it. These are the options. You don't have to choose one option. You could choose multiple options. But you got to have a way out. You should have planned this out. You don't just wing it, as we say it in the US, as you go along. Oh, I'll figure it out when I go along, right? So one of the other reasons why API is so popular, right, is because in the old days, when you build something, a software, when you want to change things, you go to IT every time and say, hey, I want you to change this for me. I want you to change my business model. I want you to change my usage model. Every time you need something, you go to IT. But when you build APIs, you don't have to do that anymore. You build an API, you give the control to the business guys. Let them figure out what needs to be done. Do I want to do open? Do I want to do protected? Do I want to do a premium model? And how much do I want to charge? What is my rate limiting? What is my charge? Monetization, usage models. Every one of that can be moved to the business line managers. That's a huge difference. Once you do that, you don't have to go and overload those guys all the time. You could go and do as you want. So it's basically let the business side managers decide the API access policy, not the IT folks. IT folks help you build it, but business guys make the decision. And you accelerate your partner onboarding. You could decide who do you want to do, how do you want to do, how do you want to expose. So you don't have to go to IT guys saying that, remember about 5 years ago, 7 years ago, or even 2 years ago, which is legacy nowadays. You go to your IT guy saying, oh, I want to bring a new partner on board. Build something for me to connect from here to here. That doesn't happen anymore. You go there and tell them, well, that's what it is. I'll give you information if you give me the money or if you sign up with me. It's as easy as that, right? And APIs enable you to do that. Reduce load on IT staff. That's key. Every time you go to IT guys anymore, they are already overloaded. You go and tell them, oh, I want you to build this for me. They're not going to do it. They're going to laugh at you and say, hey, good luck. It'll take a number and stand in the queue, right? You don't want to be doing that. You either build it by yourself with a reduced amount of staff, or more importantly, have innovators like you. Most of the guys in here are practitioners. The big IT units will come to you to help you build the API programs. So which means they can, the business unit folks, can take it to the market. They don't need IT anymore. You know, that's where the market is going. You can do it yourself with outside help and go to market by yourself. When I say yourself, it's the business unit folks. So I had a lot more slides to go on the API strategy. I don't think we'll have time to cover that. So, but one thing I want to talk to you is when you're building an API platform, again, I'm talking from an enterprise level, when you're building an API platform, these are things you need to think about. Sure, having a great API management technology is good, but just having a good portal, reporting analytics, monetization engine, that's all the technology pieces, right? Once you figure out what kind of technology piece you want to do, you can build it and execute it. But that's only 2 pieces of the puzzle. You're only 50% there. In order to do it properly, you need to figure it out. What is it you're going to do? Once you figure out what you're going to do, then it's easy to build. After you did all that, you got to have a way to do an outreach. Once you built an API, if you just hide it somewhere without publishing it, nobody's going to know. So once you built it, people have to know right away what you built. So which means you have to have a mechanism to push the information out to the consumers, right? So essentially, it all comes down to have a successful API program. There are 5 steps you need to do. Those are, define your goals first. You need to know what you're going to be doing. Know your target audience, right? You need to know who you are building that for. You need to understand the value of data. Remember I told you about junk? You need to know what it's worth for the consumers that are going to be using it, so you can charge them properly. You got to drive your platform like a product, so which means if you're going to be building a product, you figure out what the market analysis is, how much it's going to grow in a certain years. So you have all the strategy in place. When you're building an API, you got to do it the same way. And you have to resource your program accordingly. I see a lot of corporations fail in that. They say, oh, let's build an API. There is one smart kid here, there's one smart kid there. Let's pull a couple of them and throw in another guy and 3 of them. Let them build it. That's not the right way to do it. You got to have a program manager. You got to have program management, right? So you got to figure out how to resource an API development properly. So you got to define your goals, the business drivers, the success criteria, right? That's really important. How do you know when you're done? If you don't have success criteria to measure success, you'll keep working. You'll keep chugging the wheels. You don't know when you're successful, right? So you got to define success first. You got to build expectations, right? Once you define them, it's easy to meet them. But if you haven't defined them, you don't know when you met them. You got to understand the value of your data, right? You got to figure out what is my low compliance data versus high compliance. Low to moderate value data to high value data. So once you figure it out, you can figure out how do you want to expose that, whether it's a public, protected, or secure APIs or private APIs. So these are some ideas of information of how and what you want to do. This is your gold mine, protected data. If you're going to expose that, you need to properly do that. Know your target audience, right? Understand what the demand is. What is the need? Why are you building this? You're not going to be building this because everyone else is building it, right? You're building it because there is a reason, there's a purpose. So why are you building it? What's the demand? What's the need? What's the market space? What are the technologies you're going to be using for that? And who is your target audience? Who are you targeting exactly, right? So, of course, you got to figure it out. Who are the people who are going to be using it? Is it an internal? It's a high touch point? Corporate partners? Small and medium business? Or purely open APIs? Once you figure it out, then you'd be able to build it properly. You have to drive your platform like a product. You got to have offerings within that. Even when you build an API, let's say if you're building for a specific asset, you got to have a protected version of it, open version of it, a protected version of it, a mid-secure version of it, and the expectations. And you have to resource accordingly. When I say resource, it's not about development or program management resources. You also have to figure out what are the obstacles you will face. Should you have a complete internal support? You have to lobby to your management to get a buy-in first. So you got to have political people on your side. You have to have the executive sponsor support. If you don't figure that out, it's going to fail. And what kind of investment would you need, right? You just don't hire a couple of guys, throw it in, and then make sure that everything goes in. So as a great leader, Gandhi once said, you got to differentiate between your value and valuables, right? Your value needs promotion, right? Your valuables needs protection. So once you figure it out, what are your valuables by identifying and classifying and protecting them properly, and then once you figure out your values, to be able to promote that properly, expose them properly, right? It's not all about technology. Technology is the easiest part of things. Once you figure out what you want to do, it's fairly easy to build, right? I think I did well on time, so it's time for questions.
If anyone has a question, thank you, Andy.
Okay.
I'll bring it.
All right.
Yeah, hi. You talked a little bit about API quality, and it made me think that perhaps we need some industry standards here or something to help people measure the quality of APIs. Some of the government APIs, I'm not picking on them, but they're just really maybe a zip file of a database dump. That's not really an API. So other people go to a huge amount of care to make it very easy to integrate. How do we measure APIs?
So in a nutshell, your question is more about how do you measure the quality of APIs, regardless of who's producing it, right? So when it comes to measuring quality of APIs, there seems to be a misconception generally in the market that I've seen. People tend to measure an API based on the technology quality, right? So I've seen people measure saying, is the API availability, scalability, even to an extent, to some corporations, security, right? So that's technology piece of it, right? Once you figure out how to run, I have an enterprise architect background, so I've studied a lot of enterprise models, so I picked an argument with some of my buddies in the same space. The advantage of cloud, a lot of advantages of cloud, I'm not going to go into that. But in my mind, cloud has actually screwed up our software architecture principles because it hides a lot of mistakes you make, right? You build a bad thing and throw it in the cloud, and because it can scale and expand so vast, whatever the mistakes you make, it'll cover up for that, right? Which is fine, But the point itself is that if you build a bad API, if you run it in the cloud, open or whatever, the scalability of the cloud, the availability of the cloud can help you fix a lot of the technology issues that you didn't design properly. But if you build it in such a way that, say, expose sensitive assets without proper governance or control or policies in place, that if you build an API that exposes junk data, as I told you before, without exposing a quality data, what does it really mean to your customers? So when you're measuring quality of API, in my mind, it's not just about technology, it's also about the actual value that's provided to your consumer by the underlying asset. What does it mean to them? Are you properly exposing it? And the third one is, how are you properly protecting it? It goes both ways. It's about protecting your asset, what you have. It's about protecting consumer base to give it properly. So, a lot of measurement points. And that's why you need to figure out first, strategize first on if you're doing the right way. Okay?
On the first part of your presentation, not this part of the business, by the way, I was hoping you to speak a little bit more about security part, because I'm from a security background. I was hoping about that, but maybe next time. You spoke about the different formats of communication between APIs and data going on. One thing that comes to mind is standardization, that the need for a standard of communication between different services to make a space that everyone can communicate the same language. But there are problems in that area because different organizations have different interests and different parties have different types of ideas of what a standard should be. For example, the OAuth 2.0 was basically a disaster to many because of that reason exactly. From your point of view your view inside big enterprises, how can how can you create a standard that works and that is capable of giving the same level of access to everyone, every enterprise, every user? Is it possible? Is it in the future of APIs? Do you see a way of making things work at the same level for everyone, or is it not? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. First of all, about the security. I was going to security, but then I found out that I've been grouped under the business value of APIs. So, so I spoke about that. But I would love to, I'm going to be hanging around here so we can talk about security as much as you want. So the second part of the question is a little tricky. When it comes to standard-based open APIs or API interfaces, it's going to be a little tricky to maintain a standard for a couple of reasons. One, because of the openness the API provides, that's why it became so popular. As I tell my customers, the reason why people build APIs were that, remember the old days that I build the backend service, I build the middleware, I build the interface, and I build the client side of things, and the logic in between. Everything I have to build before I get it out to the market. But then with API, you don't build all of that. You don't build most of it. You build what you're capable of, what your strengths are, whether it's process, whether it's data, whether it's collaborative assets, doesn't matter. You build something that you are capable of. And then you expose an API, have the rest of the people build it for you. So which means you need to expose your asset. Again, I'm using the word asset, could be anything, right? For example, if I'm a backend provider, I expose the asset, and Kinlan recently wrote a blog about the BaaS providers, or the MBaaS model as asset providers. So let them build something on top of it, and let them build something else on top of it. So you can define a standard to an extent that, you know, how you're going from one layer, it's a bad word, but one area to another area, from a backend to a middleware to front end. So in that sense, we can provide some interface details, but then again, there's a whole new area that we haven't even talked about here, that if you go to Programmable Web, I wrote a blog recently about that. The newer set of IoTs, Internet of Things, that are coming in. That's why I asked the question to Kin earlier on. They're not even using those protocols, because it won't work for them. Imagine if you have a sensor somewhere. If it is the industrial sensors, the commercial sensors, the retail sensors, if they have to communicate using HTTP protocol, you know the amount of overhead that's involved? For sending about 10 bytes of data, you got to build a connection which is 1,000, 2,000 bytes, then secure it, then send that. So for this much of data, you're adding thousands of % of overhead. So you got to go with what's easier or more seamless or more efficient to build. So if you're going into that way of building what's more efficient, there is no way you can define the standard. You can't force them to use a standard that's built 20 years ago. So newer standards would evolve, but we maybe, again, it's my guess, over the course of years, it'll shake itself out. And whichever is going to work, it's going to work. So.
Time for one question more.
Last question. Come on, don't leave me standing. Ask some questions, somebody.
No, it's okay.
Guess not.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Now let's welcome Elie Cheviniard from Mailjet, who will talk to you about API and products and management, and you will see what he's talking about. Thank you, Elie.
Thank you, Mehdi. Hi, I'm going to try to represent the point of view and try to explain the importance of the notion of product when APIs. The microphone works? Yes. So basically, the name of the presentation is every cloud service needs a project manager, an API manager. I'm going to try to explain why. Before, one of the best practices was like manage your platform like a project. I'm going to try to explain what it means. So, API versus product. They often say, my API is my project. This is something we always hear. I have a business and my API is my project. But can we really say that? Does it mean something? I mean, an API is rather a mean than an end. It's something that you use to do something. If API were exactly the same thing as the project, then you would not have Google Maps for maps, Twilio for phone, Mailjet for email. So there is a great variety. API is a way to deliver the product. It's not the project itself. Different from the product, a way to access an app. So, is it, all we can say is their product is delivered via the API. But at the same time, it feels wrong. I mean, for Mailjet, for example, the product is the API. The API allows you to send mail. This is what we sell. So, I mean, it's not only the product that is delivered via the API is the product. It's a lot of product in the same sentence. I'm sorry, but the presentation is about this. So, my point of view is that there were no APIs before the project came in. Ken Lane talked about it a bit this morning. I'm going to try to illustrate. And today, you're starting to hear about APIs. Everybody starts to hear about APIs. You have Zapier, you have IFTTT, and they address a B2C prosumer market. APIs are very popular. That's why you have APIdays. I mean, an event 100% focused on APIs. Yesterday, I met a friend in the streets of Madrid, and I told him, I go at an event called APIdays. And he was like, what, an event 100% about APIs? He was a developer, but he was astonished about this. But the fact is, API became popular. And from my point of view, and it was a bit what Kane Lane said this morning, it's Amazon that really popularized the APIs. They had some internal service interfaces that Jeff Bezos, the CEO from Amazon, imposed internally in the early 2000s. He imposed it internally, and then he turned them into products, EC2, S3, and this is when APIs really became projects, because, I mean, EC2, S3, it's the product, and this is when people started to realize that APIs could be accessible to everyone. So, Amazon invented the API productization. That's my thesis. At the same time, productization, I cannot even pronounce it very well. Sounds very bad. I mean, it doesn't sound like a right word. So what does it mean? I'm going to take an analogy with, people who make products. Procter & Gamble, they are very known for this. Laundry detergents, anything. They build products all the time. That's what they do. I'm going to try to illustrate the process. They are in the laboratory, invent a chemical. They have this chemical. They're able to clean your socks with this chemical. So there is the possibility, there is the functionality, there's the potential to create a product, but there's not the product itself. It's a bit like Amazon when they had these internal service interfaces. They used it internally. There was a product potential. And then you turn it into a product. See? You can use it, you can distribute it, everybody can access to it. This is what Amazon did with APIs. Bezos, the Amazon CEO, really realized that it was important to go through this process. And from my point of view, so yeah, the objective was to sell. He did a bit with APIs, what Steve Jobs did with smartphone or MP3 players. He took a particular medium and he extracted some killer features and he reinvented it. It's project management. So that now you're beginning to see the importance when it comes to API of that you're dealing with a product and the importance to have this perspective. Otherwise, you just waste a lot of energy. Sorry. Project management is the key, yes. And like I was saying, Bezos didn't invent REST, just like Jobs didn't invent MP3 players. But they were great project managers, and they adopted this perspective. You following the logic of my speech, I hope? Yes? No? Oh, you're not falling asleep? It's okay. So, oh yeah, maybe you're hesitating. Maybe you think I'm, putting it up. I studied philosophy, so I love theory, and maybe this is not very practical. But when you look at, for example,